Spectacular is a mild word for describing the strange experiment with life that comprises the story of Nikola Tesla, and amazing fails to do adequate justice to the results that burst from his experiences like an exploding rocket. It is the story of the dazzling scintillations of a superman who created a new world. It is a story that condemns woman as an anchor of the flesh, which retards the development of man and limits his accomplishment, and paradoxically, proves that even the most successful life, if it does not include a woman, is a dismal failure. Even the gods of old, in the wildest imaginings of their worshippers, never undertook such gigantic tasks of worldwide dimension as those which Tesla attempted and accomplished. On the basis of his hopes, his dreams, and his achievements, he rated the status of the Olympian gods, and the Greeks would have so enshrined him. Little is the wonder that so-called practical men, with their noses stuck in profit and loss statements, did not understand him and thought him strange. The light of human progress is not a dim glow that gradually becomes more luminous with time. The panorama of human evolution is illumined by sudden bursts of dazzling brilliance in intellectual accomplishments that throw their beams far ahead to give us a glimpse of the distant future, that we may more correctly guide our wavering steps today. Tesla, by virtue of the amazing discoveries and inventions which he showered on the world, becomes one of the most resplendent flashes that has ever brightened the scroll of human advancement. Tesla created the modern era. He was unquestionably one of the world's greatest geniuses, but he leaves no offspring, no legatees of his brilliant mind, who might aid in administering that world. He created fortunes for multitudes of others, but himself died penniless, spurning wealth that might be gained from his discoveries. Even as he walked among the teeming millions of New York, he became a fabled individual who seemed to belong to the far distant future, or to have come to us from the mystical realm of the gods, for he seemed to be an admixture of a Jupiter or a Thor who hurled the shafts of lightning, an Ajax who defied the Jovian bolts, a Prometheus who transmuted energy into electricity to spread over the earth, an Aurora who would light the skies as a terrestrial electric lamp, a Mazda who created a sun in a tube, a Hercules who shook the earth with his mechanical vibrators, a Mercury who bridged the ambient realms of space with his wireless waves, and a Hermes who gave birth to an electrical soul in the earth that set it pulsating from pole to pole. This spark of intellectual incandescence, in the form of a rare creative genius, shot like a meteor into the midst of human society in the latter decades of the past century, and he lived almost until today. His name became synonymous with magic in the intellectual, scientific, engineering, and social worlds, and he was recognized as an inventor and discoverer of unrivaled greatness. He made the electric current his slave. At a time when electricity was considered almost an occult force and was looked upon with terror-stricken awe and respect, Tesla penetrated deeply into its mysteries and performed so many marvelous feats with it that, to the world, he became a master magician, with an unlimited repertoire of scientific legerdemain, so spectacular that it made the accomplishments of most of the inventors of his day seem like the work of toy tinkers. Tesla was an inventor, but he was much more than a producer of new devices. He was a discoverer of new principles, opening many new empires of knowledge which even today have been only partly explored. In a single mighty burst of invention, he created the world of power of today. He brought into being our electrical power era, the rock-bottom foundation on which the industrial system of the entire world is builded. He gave us our mass production system, for without his motors and currents, it could not exist. He created the race of robots, the electrical mechanical men that are replacing human labor. He gave us every essential of modern radio. He invented the radar 40 years before its use in World War II. He gave us our modern neon and other forms of gaseous tube lighting. He gave us our fluorescent lighting. He gave us the high-frequency currents, which are performing their electronic wonders throughout the industrial and medical worlds. He gave us remote control by wireless. He helped give us World War II, much against his will. for the misuse of his superpower system and his robot controls in industry made it possible for politicians to have available a tremendous surplus of power, production facilities, labor and materials, with which to indulge in the most frightful, devastating war that the maniacal mind could conceive. And these discoveries are merely the inventions made by the mastermind of Tesla, which have thus far been utilized. Scores of others remain still unused. There was no evidence whatever that a Superman was being born when the stroke of midnight between July 9th and 10th, in the year 1856, brought a son, Nikola, to the home of the Reverend Nikola Tesla and Juka, his wife, in the hamlet of Smiljan, in the Austro-Hungarian border province of Lika, now a part of Yugoslavia. The father of the new arrival, pastor of the village church, was a former student in an officer's training school who had rebelled against the restrictions of army life and turned to the ministry as the field in which he could more satisfactorily express himself. The mother, although totally unable to read or write, was nevertheless an intellectually brilliant woman who, without the help of literal aids, became really well educated. Both father and mother contributed to the child a valuable heritage of culture developed and passed on by ancestral families that had been community leaders for many generations. The father came from a family that contributed sons in equal numbers to the church and to the army. The mother was a member of the Mandic family, whose sons, for generations without number, had, with very few exceptions, become ministers of the Serbian Orthodox Church, and whose daughters were chosen as wives by ministers. Juka, the mother of Nikola Tesla, her given name in English translation would be Georgina, was the eldest daughter in a family of 7 children. Her father, like her husband, was a minister of the Serbian Orthodox Church. Her mother, after a period of failing eyesight, had become blind shortly after the 7th child was born. So Juka, the eldest daughter, at a tender age, was compelled to take over the major share of her mother's duties. This not alone prevented her from attending school. Her work at home so completely consumed her time that she was unable to acquire even the rudiments of reading and writing through home study. This was a strange situation in the cultured family of which she was a member. Tesla, however, always credited his unlettered mother, rather than his erudite father, with being the source from which he inherited his inventive ability. She devised many household labor-saving instruments. She was, in addition, a very practical individual, and her well-educated husband wisely left in her hands all business matters involving both the church and his household. Speaking for himself, he said that, "I have already had more than my full measure of this exquisite enjoyment, so much that for many years my life was little short of continuous rapture. I am credited with being one of the hardest workers, and perhaps I am, if thought is the equivalent of labor, for I have devoted to it almost all of my waking hours. But if work is interpreted to be a definite performance in a specified time, according to a rigid rule, then I may be the worst of idlers. Every effort under compulsion demands a sacrifice of life energy. I never paid such a price. On the contrary, I have thrived on my thoughts. Our first endeavors are purely instinctive, promptings of an imagination vivid and undisciplined. As we grow older, reason asserts itself, and we become more and more systematic in designing. But those early impulses, though not immediately productive, are of the greatest moment and may shape our very destinies. Indeed, I feel now that had I understood and cultivated instead of suppressing them, I would have added substantial value to my bequest to the world. But not until I had attained manhood did I realize that I was an inventor. This was due to a number of causes. In the first place, he had a brother who was gifted to an extraordinary degree, one of those rare phenomena of mentality which biological investigation has failed to explain. His premature death left his parents disconsolate. They owned a horse which had been presented to them by a dear friend. It was a magnificent animal of Arabian breed, possessed of almost human intelligence, and was cared for and petted by the whole family, having on one occasion saved his father's life under remarkable circumstances. His father had been called one winter night to perform an urgent duty, and while crossing the mountains infested by wolves, the horse became frightened and ran away, throwing him violently to the ground. It arrived home bleeding and exhausted, but after the alarm was sounded, immediately dashed off again, returning to the spot. And before the searching party were far on the way, they were met by his father, who had recovered consciousness and remounted, not realizing that he had been lying in the snow for several hours. This horse was responsible for his brother's injuries, from which he died. He witnessed the tragic scene, and although 56 years have elapsed since, his visual impression of it has lost none of its force. The recollection of his attainments made every effort of him seem dull in comparison. He was intended from his very birth for the clerical profession, and this thought constantly oppressed him. He longed to be an engineer, but his father was inflexible. His father was the son of an officer who served in the army of the great Napoleon, and, in common with his brother, professor of mathematics in a prominent institution, had received a military education, but, singularly enough, later embraced the clergy, in which vocation he achieved eminence. He was a very erudite man, a veritable natural philosopher, poet, and writer, and his sermons were said to be as eloquent as those of Abraham of Sancta Clara. He had a prodigious memory, and frequently recited at length from works in several languages. He often remarked playfully that if some of the classics were lost, he could restore them. His style of writing was much admired. He penned sentences short and terse, and was full of wit and satire. The humorous remarks he made were always peculiar and characteristic. Just to illustrate, Tesla mentioned one or two instances. Among the help, there was a cross-eyed man called Mane, employed to do work around the farm. He was chopping wood one day. As he swung the axe, my father, who stood nearby and felt very uncomfortable, cautioned him, "For God's sake, Mane, do not strike at what you are looking, but at what you intend to hit." On another occasion, he was taking out for a drive a friend who carelessly permitted his costly fur coat to rub on the carriage wheel. My father reminded him of it, saying, "Pull in your coat, you are ruining my tire." He had the odd habit of talking to himself and would often carry on an animated conversation and indulge in heated argument, changing the tone of his voice. A casual listener might have sworn that several people were in the room. Tesla telling about his mother. "Although I must trace to my mother's influence whatever inventiveness I possess, the training he gave me must have been helpful. It comprised all sorts of exercises, as guessing one another's thoughts, discovering the defects of some form or expression, repeating long sentences, or performing mental calculations. These daily lessons were intended to strengthen memory and reason, and especially to develop the critical sense, and were undoubtedly very beneficial. My mother descended from one of the oldest families in the country and a line of inventors. Both her father and grandfather originated numerous implements for household, agricultural, and other uses. She was a truly great woman, of rare skill, courage, and fortitude, who had braved the storms of life and passed through many a trying experience. When she was 16, a virulent pestilence swept the country. Her father was called away to administer the last sacraments to the dying, and during his absence, she went alone to the assistance of a neighboring family who were stricken by the dread disease. All of the members, 5 in number, succumbed in rapid succession. She bathed, clothed, and laid out the bodies, decorating them with flowers according to the custom of the country, and when her father returned, he found everything ready for a Christian burial. My mother was an inventor of the first order, and would, I believe, have achieved great things, had she not been so remote from modern life and its multifold opportunities. She invented and constructed all kinds of tools and devices, and wove the finest designs from thread, which was spun by her. She even planted the seeds, raised the plants, and separated the fibers herself. She worked indefatigably, from break of day till late at night, and most of the wearing apparel and furnishings of the home was the product of her hands. When she was past 60, her fingers were still nimble enough to tie 3 knots in an eyelash. Nikola Tesla reported experiencing vivid visions and mental images throughout his life. These visions were often related to his work and inventions, and he believed they were a source of inspiration and guidance. On talking about this vision, Tesla tells that, "In my boyhood I suffered from a peculiar affliction due to the appearance of images, often accompanied by strong flashes of light, which marred the sight of real objects and interfered with my thought and action. They were pictures of things and scenes which I had really seen, never of those I imagined. When a word was spoken to me, the image of the object it designated would present itself vividly to my vision, and sometimes I was quite unable to distinguish whether what I saw was tangible or not. This caused me great discomfort and anxiety. None of the students of psychology or physiology whom I have consulted could ever explain satisfactorily these phenomena. They seem to have been unique, although I was probably predisposed, as I know that my brother experienced a similar trouble. The theory I have formulated is that the images were the result of a reflex action from the brain on the retina under great excitation. They certainly were not hallucinations such as are produced in diseased and anguished minds, for in other respects I was normal and composed. To give an idea of my distress, suppose that I had witnessed a funeral or some such nerve-wracking spectacle. Then, inevitably, in the stillness of night, a vivid picture of the scene would thrust itself before my eyes and persist despite all my efforts to banish it. Sometimes it would even remain fixed in space though I pushed my hand through it. If my explanation is correct, it should be able to project on a screen the image of any object one conceives and make it visible. Such an advance would revolutionize all human relations. I am convinced that this wonder can and will be accomplished in time to come. I may add that I have devoted much thought to the solution of the problem.
To free myself of these tormenting appearances, I tried to concentrate my mind on something else I had seen, and in this way, I would have obtained temporary relief. But in order to get it, I had to conjure continuously new images. It was not long before I found that I had exhausted all of those at my command. My reel had run out, as it were, because I had seen little of the world, only objects in my home and the immediate surroundings. As I performed these mental operations for the second or third time, in order to chase the appearances from my vision, the remedy gradually lost all its force. Then, I instinctively commenced to make excursions beyond the limits of the small world of which I had knowledge, and I saw new scenes. These were at first very blurred and indistinct, and would flit away when I tried to concentrate my attention upon them, but by and by I succeeded in fixing them. They gained in strength and distinctness, and finally assumed the concreteness of real things. I soon discovered that my best comfort was attained if I simply went on in my vision farther and farther, getting new impressions all the time, and so I began to travel, of course, in my mind. Every night, and sometimes during the day, when alone, I would start on my journeys, see new places, cities, and countries, live there, meet people, and make friendships and acquaintances, and, however unbelievable, it is a fact that they were just as dear to me as those in actual life, and not a bit less intense in their manifestations. This I did constantly, until I was about 17, when my thoughts turned seriously to invention. Then I observed to my delight that I could visualize with the greatest facility. I needed no models, drawings, or experiments. I could picture them all as real in my mind. Thus, I have been led unconsciously to evolve what I consider a new method of materializing inventive concepts and ideas, which is radically opposite to the purely experimental and is, in my opinion, ever so much more expeditious and efficient. The moment one constructs a device to carry into practice a crude idea, he finds himself unavoidably engrossed with the details and defects of the apparatus. As he goes on improving and reconstructing, his force of concentration diminishes, and he loses sight of the great underlying principle. Results may be obtained, but always at the sacrifice of quality. Willful effort, but I never had any control over the flashes of light to which I have referred. They were, perhaps, my strangest experience, and inexplicable. They usually occurred when I found myself in a dangerous or distressing situation, or when I was greatly exhilarated, In some instances, I have seen all the air around me filled with tongues of living flame. Their intensity, instead of diminishing, increased with time and seemingly attained a maximum when I was about 25 years old. While in Paris in 1883, a prominent French manufacturer sent me an invitation to a shooting expedition, which I accepted. I had been long confined to the factory, and the fresh air had a wonderfully invigorating effect on me. On my return to the city that night, I felt a positive sensation that my brain had caught fire. I saw a light as though a small sun was located in it, and I passed the whole night applying cold compressions to my tortured head. Finally, the flashes diminished in frequency and force, but it took more than 3 weeks before they wholly subsided. When a second invitation was extended to me, my answer was an emphatic no. These luminous phenomena still manifest themselves from time to time, as when a new idea opening up possibilities strikes me, but they are no longer exciting, being of relatively small intensity. When I close my eyes, I invariably observe first a background of very dark and uniform blue, not unlike the sky on a clear but starless night. In a few seconds, this field becomes animated with innumerable scintillating flakes of green, arranged in several layers and advancing towards me. Then there appears to the right a beautiful pattern of 2 systems of parallel and closely spaced lines, at right angles to one another, in all sorts of colors, with yellow, green, and gold predominating. Immediately thereafter, the lines grow brighter, and the whole is thickly sprinkled with dots of twinkling light. This picture moves slowly across the field of vision, and in about 10 seconds vanishes to the left, leaving behind a ground of rather unpleasant and inert gray, which quickly gives way to a billowy sea of clouds, seemingly trying to mold themselves in living shapes. It is curious that I cannot project a form into this gray until the second phase is reached. Every time, before falling asleep, images of persons or objects flit before my view. When I see them, I know that I am about to lose consciousness. If they are absent and refuse to come, it means a sleepless night. Nikola Tesla, like many teenagers, had his share of habits that might be considered less than ideal. Some of his reported bad habits during his teenage. He tells that, at a certain age, I contracted a mania for gambling, which greatly worried my parents. To sit down to a game of cards was for me the quintessence of pleasure. My father led an exemplary life and could not excuse the senseless waste of time and money in which I indulged. I had a strong resolve, but my philosophy was bad. I would say to him, I can stop whenever I please, but is it worthwhile to give up that which I would purchase with the joys of paradise? On frequent occasions, he gave vent to his anger and contempt, but my mother was different. She understood the character of men and knew that one's salvation could only be brought about through his own efforts. One afternoon, I remember, when I had lost all my money and was craving for a game, she came to me with a roll of bills and said, "Go and enjoy yourself. The sooner you lose all we possess, the better it will be. I know that you will get over it." She was right. I conquered my passion then and there, and only regretted that it had not been 100 times as strong. I not only vanquished, but tore it from my heart, so as not to leave even a trace of desire. Ever since that time, I have been as indifferent to any form of gambling as to picking teeth. During another period, I smoked excessively, threatening to ruin my health. Then my will asserted itself, and I not only stopped, but destroyed all inclination. Long ago, I suffered from heart trouble, until I discovered that it was due to the innocent cup of coffee I consumed every morning. I discontinued at once, though I confess it was not an easy task. In this way, I checked and bridled other habits and passions, and have not only preserved my life, but derived an immense amount of satisfaction from what most men would consider privation and sacrifice. Nikola Tesla's education. Tesla's years in school were more important for the activities in which he engaged in after-school hours than for what he learned in the classroom. At the age of 10, having finished his elementary studies in the normal school, Tesla entered the college, called the Real Gymnasium, at Gospic. This was not an unusually early age to enter the Real Gymnasium, as that school corresponds more to our grammar school and junior high school than to our college. One of the requirements, and one to which an unusually large percentage of the class time was devoted throughout the 4 years, was freehand drawing. Tesla detested the subject almost to the point of open rebellion, and his marks were accordingly very low, but not entirely owing to a lack of ability. Tesla was left-handed as a boy, but later became ambidextrous. Left-handedness was a definite handicap in the freehand drawing studies, but he could have done much better work than he actually produced, and would have gotten higher marks if it were not for a piece of altruism in which he engaged. A student whom he could excel in drawing was striving hard for a scholarship. Were he to receive the lowest marks in freehand drawing, he would be unable to obtain the scholarship. Tesla sought to help his fellow student by intentionally getting the lowest rating in the small class. Mathematics was his favorite subject, and he distinguished himself in that study. His unusual proficiency in this field was not considered a counterbalancing virtue to make amends for his lack of enthusiasm for freehand drawing. A strange power permitted him to perform unusual feats in mathematics. He possessed it from early boyhood, but had considered it a nuisance and tried to be rid of it because it seemed beyond his control. If he thought of an object, it would appear before him exhibiting the appearance of solidity and massiveness. So greatly did these visions possess the attributes of actual objects that it was usually difficult for him to distinguish between vision and reality. This abnormal faculty functioned in a very useful fashion in his schoolwork with mathematics. If he was given a problem in arithmetic or algebra, it was immaterial to him whether he went to the blackboard to work it out or whether he remained in his seat. His strange faculty permitted him to see a visioned blackboard on which the problem was written, and there appeared on this blackboard all of the operations and symbols required in working out the solution. Each step appeared much more rapidly than he could work it out by hand on the actual slate. As a result, he could give the solution almost as quickly as the whole problem was stated. His teachers, at first, had some doubts about his honesty, thinking he had worked out some clever deceit for getting the right answers. In due time, their skepticism was dispelled, and they accepted him as a student who was unusually apt at mental arithmetic. He would not reveal this power to anyone, and would discuss it only with his mother, who in the past had encouraged him in his efforts to banish it. Now that the power had demonstrated some definite usefulness, though, he was not so anxious to be completely rid of it, but desired to bring it under his complete control. Work that Tesla did outside school hours interested him much more than his schoolwork. He was a rapid reader and had a memory that was retentive to the point, almost, of infallibility. He found it easy to acquire foreign languages. In addition to his native Serbo-Croat language, he became proficient in the use of German, French, and Italian. This opened to him great stores of knowledge to which other students did not have access. Yet this knowledge, apparently, was of little use to him in his schoolwork. He was interested in things mechanical, but the school provided no manual training course. Nevertheless, he became proficient in the working of wood and metals with tools and methods of his own contriving. In the classroom of one of the upper grades of the Real Gymnasium, models of water wheels were on exhibition. They were not working models, but nevertheless, they aroused Tesla's enthusiasm. They recalled to him the crude wheel he had constructed in the hills of Smiljan. He had seen pictures of the magnificent Niagara Falls. Coupling the power possibilities presented by the majestic waterfalls and the intriguing possibilities he saw in the models of the water wheels, he aroused in himself a passion to accomplish a grand achievement. Waxing eloquent on the subject, he told his father, "Someday, I am going to America and harness Niagara Falls to produce power." 30 years later, he was to see this prediction fulfilled. There were many books in his father's library. The knowledge in those books interested him more than that which he received in school, and he wished to spend his evenings reading them. As in other matters, he carried this to an extreme, so his father forbade him to read them, fearing that he would ruin his eyes in the poor light of tallow candles then used for illumination. Nikola sought to circumvent this ruling by taking candles to his room and reading after he was sent to bed, but his violation of orders was soon discovered and the family candle supply was hidden. Next, he fashioned a candle mold out of a piece of tin and made his own candles. Then, by plugging the keyhole and the chinks around the door, he was able to spend the night hours reading volumes purloined from his father's bookshelves. Frequently, he said, he would read through the entire night and feel none the worse for the loss of sleep. Eventual discovery, however, brought paternal discipline of a vigorous nature. He was about 11 years old at this time. Some notable achievements during his time in Graz include Tesla's design for a DC motor, which was praised by his professors and demonstrated his early talent for innovation. His experiments with electromagnetic induction, which laid the foundation for his later work on AC systems. Overall, Tesla's education in Graz was a pivotal moment in his life, shaping his interests, skills, and future direction as a pioneering engineer and inventor.